Okay, good morning. We're continuing in Sefer Shoftim. We're in Perek Yud Beis. We're just finishing. It lasts just a couple minutes on the last of the in-between Shoftim before we get to Shimshon, which will begin very soon. And we finished with the discussion of Iftzon. Iftzon was Boaz. We had a whole discussion how it appears that Iftzon was not kind to Manoach and his wife, and when he made all those wedding feasts, he did not invite Manoach to the wedding feast because he felt there was no benefit of inviting him. Since Manoach and his wife had no children, he would never get re-invited to Manoach's simchas. So why should I invite him to mine? Which we'll see. Keep that in mind. There may be some carryover into this story in that area as well. However, he did do one chesed with Ruth and Boaz by performing Yibum and doing the levirate marriage to Ruth, and he did a kindness to her. So because of that kindness, he at least got one child that remained due to his chesed, and the other children, as the Medrash says, they all died. Right? So the one that he did have, Oved, who brought Yishai and who brought David HaMelech, there was something good that came from that. So interesting, the word Boaz also has the word Bo-Az. In him there was Az, there was Tokef, there was strength, there was boldness against his Yetzer Hara. And we see that the Medrash says that Yosef's test of morality with the wife of Potiphar was nothing compared to Boaz's test with Ruth, because the wife of Potiphar was totally forbidden to Yosef. She was an Egyptian, she was a married woman, so from a moralistic point of view, it was totally forbidden to do anything with her, notwithstanding how young Yosef was, but still it was a blatant sin that could not be justified in any way. So Yosef passed the test. It's a big thing. Over Boaz, truth of the matter is, Ruth was not married at the time. Okay, she was a single woman. The Medrash even says she went to the mikvah before she encountered Boaz. So therefore, there was nothing from a pure Torah perspective wrong. However, it was not a proper thing to do without a proper wedding and all the other things. And she really, as well, in a certain way, tried to seduce him. So we say that it was a much harder test for Boaz, and he had the Az, the strength, and the tokav to be able to withstand it. So again, you see the juxtaposition between Yiftach's failure versus Boaz's success, and and as we see that although when he met with Ruth, he gave her 6 kernels of grain, again that number 6 that we talked about, at the end of the day he ruled 7 years. And we said 6 does not represent success, but 7 represents a success. So by him ruling 7 years, he kind of pulled things together, and he was successful. And according to Chazal, which was most interesting, is that the day that he married Ruth publicly, and then the day after the wedding night with Ruth, he died. Boaz died. In other words, he was an older man. There's no question about it. He was an older man, and he died and did not see any nachas from the one child that did survive. Very interesting. The 60 children he had, they died, and the one that survived, as it were, he did not survive it, but he got a tremendous merit. So that ended it. So the last day of his life was, you never know when your purpose in life comes. And you figured after you have 60 kids, you for sure fulfilled your purpose. And then comes along a convert, Ruth, and really he was a much older man and didn't, obviously, God forbid, one should never say he was a quote-unquote dirty old man. And he, was not necessarily in his personally best interest to marry such a younger woman at such an advanced age. But we see that that was his purpose. And that he passed away the next day. So that was the end of his rule as it was as a shofet, which I'm sure may have cast some aspersions on him, because the whole idea of Ruth was a whole questionable idea. She came from Moabite origin. If she was permitted or not, I don't really want to go there. But be that as it may, Boaz showed his integrity, and he felt this was the right thing to do, and luckily it was. And we see in retrospect it was, because David HaMelech came from that union. So Boaz did show a tremendous amount of integrity, and that's all we really know about him. It's interesting, as we go further through Shoftim, it's very reminiscent of what other book of the Torah? Sefer Bamidbar, to a great extent. Sefer Bamidbar talks about the 38 years that the Jews were in the desert, and all you ever see is bad things about the Jews. Every story in Sefer Bamidbar, even this week's Parsha B'Shalach, we will notice a number of things that put the Jews in a bad light. They complain about the bitter water. They complain about not having water, and then Amalek goes and attacks them afterwards. They were complaining to Moshe before they had to cross the Sea of Reeds. You sent us here just to die. And then throughout the travelings in the desert, the only things that are mentioned are the negative things. So one would tend to think that the Jews were just a terrible bunch of people. So the answer is, but you got to realize, it was over a course of 38 years, it was 10 things. It was 10 things. So the Torah highlights the faults, but don't forget that it was 38 years minus 10 days. They were perfect. So you kind of lose that, because what about all the other days? Or days that we're sitting and learning and we're good people. So they made 10 mistakes. We're not gonna, and that's where the Torah doesn't hide the mistakes, and we should learn from the mistakes. There's a lot of good that went on as well. I think also as we're going through Sefer Shoftim, for example, as far as we know, Boaz, was a good fellow. Doesn't say there's not a lot on him. Well, if he's a good fellow, there's not much to write. There's nothing much to write, because he did what was supposed to be done. The Torah tells you how you're supposed to behave. The Torah tells us what you're supposed to do. So if everything's fine, everything's fine. Shoftim only is highlighting the negatives, because that's really what we learn from their mistakes. And everything else we assume should have been in order. And as we'll see when we start the next chapter with Shimshon, similar idea. God is very precise, very particular with His Jewish people, and any mistakes is serious. And therefore, when everything is fine, there's not a lot to write. So here you have 3 Shoftim in a row. Everything seems to be okay, so there's not a lot to write. Okay, let's continue. Pasuk Yud Aleph. Vayishbar acharov es Yisrael Elon HaZvuloni. The next shofet after Boaz was a person by the name of Elon from Zvulun, the tribe of Zvulun, Zvuloni. Vayishbar es Yisrael Eser Shonim, and he was a judge over the Jews for 10 years. Now, we'll see in a minute, Elon may not have been his name, but as we'll see in a minute, he came from an area called Ayalon. So he came from Ayalon. It could have well been borrowed from the name of the city, or vice versa for that matter. As well, the commentaries mention, we've seen it before with Tola the son of Puah, and with Yor HaGiladi. We see with Elon that it seems that the custom was that they named their children after ancestors of many years before, and one of the sons of Zvulun was called Elon. So you see similar, that they were naming people after descendants many years before. And as well, we'll see his city as well. Pasuk Yud Beis, Vayamos Elon HaZvuloni, and then he died. Vayikaver Bayalon Beretz Zvulun. He was buried in Ayalon, in the land of Zvulun. So that's all we know about him. Okay, moving on. Imagine 10 years passed and there's nothing to say. He was a judge.
He did the right thing.
Guess everything was okay. There's nothing to say. Yud Beis. Vayishpod acharov Yisrael Avdon ben Hillel HaPirasoni. And now the next person who led the Jewish people, was a judge over them. His name was Avdon, the son of Hillel, who came from a place called Pir Oson. Okay. Vayihilo arboim bonim ushloshim b'nei bonim rochvim al shivim ayorim. He had 40 sons and 30 grandsons, and they all were riding on 70 mules. Okay. Ayorim, one second. And they're called young mules, young donkeys. When they're very young, they're called ayorim and ayor. Vayishvar Yisrael shmona shanim, and he judged the Jewish people for 8 years. Vayamas Avdon ben Hillel Pirasoni, and then Avdon, the son of Hillel of Pirason, died. Vayikaver bePirason, he was buried in Pirason. Be'eretz Ephraim, in the land of Ephraim. Behar Amaleki, in the mountains of Amalek. So we see that the judging reverted back to Ephraim. Get back to Ephraim.
To say that they were writing ayorim.
Okay, so again, guess we'll have to say.
We had that before.
We had it before, and it again, number one. So the Radak over here spells out that this story is also to inform you about his hatzlacha, about his success, that he saw children and grandchildren who were great people riding on ayorim, riding on donkeys. Mean to say, because of their great wealth, they didn't have to bother doing anything else. They didn't have to work hard, and they could ride on these donkeys. And it seems that it was more people who had lots of time on their hands. In other words, it was a sign of being wealthy and not troubled with having to work hard on the farm and things like that. And as well, we can say, as I think we've mentioned in the past, the idea of riding upon a donkey means that one has overcome the donkeyness, the earthliness, the grossness of physicality, and you're riding upon the donkey, and you're not the donkey not ruling over you, but you ruling over the donkey, show that they were spiritually involved. There's all kinds of mystical connotations to these numbers, the 30s and the 40s and the 70s. I really don't want to go there. It's not going to interest me.
How long did you judge for? 7 years?
8 years.
8 years.
8 years, again, is a very special number because 8 means above nature, which means did quite well. And all the mystical allusions to these numbers suggest there was quite a lot of success that he had. Okay, so we had 22 years. We have the you have 25 years. 7, 10, and 8. 25 years of relative good, as it were. Is there anything else that I'm skipping? I don't think so. I think we got it all in here. Okay, so now we're ready to start Shimshon. Okay, Perek Yud Gimel, Pasuk Aleph. All right. Vayusifu b'nei Yisrael lasos hara b'nei Hashem, and the Jewish people continued to do evil in the ways of Hashem. Vayitneim Hashem biyad Plishtim, and Hashem put them into the hands of the Plishtim, Arboim Shana, 40 years. So now, there's 3 things we can notice in this pasuk. Number 1, this is the first time we're going to have an encounter with the Plishtim. This is a new nemesis for the Jewish people. After the last nemesis of the Jewish people, which was themselves, that's what we saw between Ephraim and Manasseh. And once really we got rid of all the old nemesis. The Canaanites were finished. Midian, Bnei Ammon, etc., seem to not have any of these problems. So now, instead of problems coming from the area themselves or from the east, we now go to the west, meaning the coastal area along the Mediterranean, is where the Plishtim live, and this becomes the next nemesis, and a nemesis for a long time. It's not only in this Sefer, it's going to be in Sefer Shmuel, with Shaul and David, etc. So this becomes a new nemesis. That's point 1. Number 2, this is also officially, really, the last Shofet listed in Sefer Shoftim. There will still be, technically, Eli and Shmuel, but they are written in the Book of Shmuel. But in the Book of Shoftim, Shimshon's going to take up a number of chapters, and then we get some other stories which we're not exactly sure the timing and placing of them, but he is in the era of, again, the way God canonized the books of the Tanakh. In the Book of Shoftim, you have to understand why, when and if we do learn Sefer Shmuel, why Eli and Shmuel, who are Shoftim, are not written in the Book of Shoftim, but in the Book of Shmuel. But at least at the end of the Book of Shoftim, Shimshon is the last judge. So there's probably got to be some connection to that, and hopefully as we go through the course of learning Shimshon, we will see what that connection is. Now, the Radak mentions something interesting here. And he says that Shimshon, as we will see later on, Shimshon rules for 20 years, and during that, and it says that the Plishtim ruled over us 40 years. So it appears that those 20 years are included within those 40 years of oppression of the Plishtim, seeming to indicate that his leadership was not strong enough to totally vanquish the Plishtim during a good part of his rule that he was there. As well, the Ralbag mentions that it seems that the Jews continued to do bad, and this was the reason why the Plishtim were able to rule over them for 40 years. That's the measure for measure. And the Ralbag says that this number began when coincided with Shimshon's rule, and suggests as well that even beforehand Hashem had given them over into the hands of the Plishtim. Before he even says, interesting, you have to know how to figure out the years over here, but he says even already in the times of Yiftach, the Plishtim were already a problem, and certainly afterwards. So it seems that these Plishtim became a chronic problem from the end of Yiftach. So then we'd have to, it's a very cryptic statement in the Ralbag, so then we have to realize what were the other three Shoftim in between. That the Plishtim are still bothering us. Maybe they didn't have enough merits to make a difference. Hard to know, not enough information on that point. I just want to add one other issue that really could have been something that's been mentioned earlier, but the commentaries discuss it over here. So the idea is, whenever you see the words, it says they did bad, right? But they added two more words, or the two words that are being added over here. In Hashem's eyes. Okay. In other words, if you think about that for a minute, why does the Navi add those? We've had this before. Whenever the Jews got sold into people's hands, let's just pick whatever comes up over here. I think before Devorah should say that as well. It said that Perak Dalet Pasuk Aleph, almost exact same words. Vayisif b'nei Yisrael lasos hara b'nei Hashem. So we didn't dwell on it before, but it's good to dwell on this now a little bit. So what is implying? They did evil in the eyes of Hashem. What does that imply? What's wrong with saying they did evil? Obviously, the Navi is writing the Sefer. The Navi, the prophet with prophecy, is writing the book. If he says they did evil, they probably did evil in the eyes of Hashem. So why do you have to belabor the point and say they did evil in the eyes of Hashem? The answer is, they did evil, but it only could be perceived as evil in the eyes of Hashem. And everybody else thought that they were fine. Do you understand? Yeah. In other words, something can be considered evil by Hashem even though the people may not consider it wrong at all. You understand? That's a very good deduction, and very subtle, and you could read it 10 times and not realize it. Well, they did really bad things. What was evil in the eyes of Hashem? And the truth is, people may even consider it virtuous. But in the eyes of Hashem, it's not. And, there's many examples of this throughout the Tanakh. We know the story of Shaul, when he thought he fulfilled the words of Hashem by destroying Amalek. And then the prophet Shmuel says, you did not listen to what Hashem wanted. Hashem wanted you because he did not kill the king, he did not kill the animals. Meanwhile, Shaul thought for sure he did the will of Hashem. And then he says, you for sure did not do the will of Hashem. So it's interesting that when we're dealing with the Jewish people over here. So even Shaul HaMelech himself, like he even there's a whole discussion if he even went to the great Sanhedrin, and he got approval for that. But maybe there's an error in judgment, but still called evil in the eyes of Hashem. So when the Torah says the people in Shimshon's time did evil in the eyes of Hashem, means they didn't do anything that we would label as evil necessarily, and it's still an era where prophets live, and prophecy. The fact that you have a Navi, you have to realize that prophecy is not bestowed on any Jew, no matter how worthy he is, unless the entire generation merits that God, that there should be a person that God would speak to. You have to understand that. There's no such thing. Why do we not have Navis today? Because the whole generation isn't on the level to deserve to have a Navi. If there is a real bona fide Jewish prophet, that means the atmosphere in the Jewish world has to be really good for God to even appear to one person. Right? People like Hillel, tzaddikim like Hillel, was unbelievable. Hillel, he wasn't a Navi because the generation wasn't worthy at all. So obviously the generation of Shimshon had to be worthy because there were prophets. We'll see in a minute. There was a prophet. Pinchas was still alive. So that's one thing. So, and it was a generation that was still very dependent on Hashem. Now, so the point of the matter is, and this one thing has to be emphasized, so if you do any little thing, in God's eyes it's considered bad, even though you don't think it's such a bad thing. So that's an important thing to realize. That's point number one. Point number two that has to be emphasized is that it doesn't necessarily mean that all the Jews were doing something wrong. We know already from the beginning of Sefer Yoshua that the Jewish people lost the battle in war because what? Because Hashem said the Jewish people have sinned, and they thought it was one Jew. It was just one Jew. Because all the Jews are responsible one for another, so that's it. So Jewish people sin. So when it says that the Jewish people did bad in the eyes of Hashem, it doesn't necessarily mean a lot of people sinned. It could definitely be a significant minority. For example, sin of the golden calf was only a couple thousand Jews out of 600,000 Jews. And it wasn't even the mainstream of the Jews. It was the Erev Rav, the ones who converted from the Egyptians. Many times when it says the Jews were bad, it could have been, Dosan and Aviram. Torah says that Jewish people were told in this week's parsha, don't leave over any man. And they left, and says the Jewish people left over man. Jewish people left over man? It was just two guys, Dosan and Aviram. 3 million Jews did not leave over any man. So two guys did, so the Jewish people left over man. So the fact that it says that Jews who are bad in the eyes of Hashem, so it could be, number one, it wasn't a lot, and number two, it was something very subtle, like with Shaul HaMelech, which I don't want to go into Shaul, but like it was subtle. There was good reason to think that he was doing the right thing. So similarly over here, again, you have to realize that the standards of Judaism are very high. And when God says the Jews are immoral, okay, it's a relative statement. Jewish morality is like way beyond what a non-Jew would understand morality to be. And therefore, even Jews thinking to do things that aren't correct would be labeled as strong immorality. So, and even more than that, the fact of the matter is that we still had a great Sanhedrin. Sanhedrin means you have to have 70 tremendous sages. We also know that there had to be smaller Sanhedrins of 23 judges each, and these had to be people who are in impeccable integrity, and these smaller Sanhedrins of 23 had to be set up in every town that had a population of 120 males or more. So you're talking about lots and lots of people in the Sanhedrin. So there were a lot of people that were really very good people. But the point is, Hashem demands nothing less than spiritual perfection. And therefore, if it's evils in the eyes of Hashem, that's enough to make problems. And we've seen it enough in the Torah to realize that that's what it means. So again, if you're learning Navi out of context of Torah, then you get the wrong impression. Otherwise, they're terrible people. It only takes a little bit of people to do what is wrong to indict the entire Jewish people. And you see this especially in the times of the Torah, of the Navi, etc., etc. So we don't know to what extent, we don't have enough details, but clearly if it's Beinei Hashem, then it's Beinei Hashem. And therefore we have to look at them more favorably. That's all I'm trying to say. We keep saying, didn't they learn their lessons? Did they learn their lessons? Again, we would suggest they really were by and large probably good people, but you just need a few people to not do well, and then already, God indicts the entire people. Okay, moving on. Pasuk Beis. Now we're going to have a very interesting, this is the longest and most detailed description surrounding a person's birth found in the entire Torah. Coming up now. And it's really almost a whole chapter. We're not even going to meet Shimshon till the end of this chapter. We're going to go through a quarter of the story of Shimshon before he's even born. So there's a lot of discussion about his parents. Obviously, this is going to herald a tremendous amount of significance of who this person's coming up. And this is not your average person. And you really have to remember all the things you may have seen in the Cecil B. DeMille's movies about Samson is like totally a distortion. And we have to realize, we're not even going to call him Samson, we're just going to call him Shimshon. And he was, as we will see, there was tremendous opportunities for this person to be no less than the Mashiach himself. Okay, so this is not a small item over here. And there's one important blessing that we're going to have to keep focus on throughout. And these were the blessings that Yaakov gave to his 12 children. And let's take a look at the bracha that he gave to Dan, because we'll see that Shimshon comes from Shevet Dan, the tribe of Dan. So he says like this. It's Yaakov. It's in Perek Mem Tes, Pasuk Tes Zayin, Yud Zayin, and Yud Ches. Very, very interesting blessings indeed. He says, Don Yodin Amo. Don will avenge his people. Ke'achad Shifte Yisrael. Now, simply means like one of the tribes of Israel. Our scroll translated as according to the Medrash, the tribes of Israel will be united as one. Yehi Don Nachash. Don will be like a snake. Be a snake. Alei derech, on the highway. Shvifon alei yarach, like a viper on the path. Hanoshech ikvesus, who will bite horses' heels. Vayipol rochvo achor, and the rider falls backwards. So we'll have to see, that's very unusual. And then the landing is most unusual, which he never said about any of his children. Lishuascha kivisi Hashem. For your salvation, oh, do I long, O Hashem. And so all the Meforshim say that Yaakov is alluding, and as in all the blessings, he was alluding to the future generations of these children. And Yaakov is prophetically alluding to Dan's most illustrious descendant, which is Shimshon, because we will see he single-handedly fought against the Plishtim. And we will see the nature of his success, and there's going to be a lot of, I'm going to kind of make it more interesting and not let the cat out of the bag in the beginning. I could tell you right now what the method, everything he did, but that would take away from the interest. So I'm going to leave it for later. But certainly it's not the way we understand it. And when it says, Ke'achad Shifti Yisrael, is he brought a certain degree of unity to the people, and as well, he was like one of the unique tribes. In other words, he was just like, as we'll see, like David HaMelech from the tribe of Yehuda. And the pasuk of being like a snake and a viper will describe some of the tactics that Shimshon had to do, which you have to understand. A snake is very tricky and attacks in ways that the victim doesn't realize until it's too late. We're going to have to see exactly, why is he called a snake? And then finally, this last pasuk, Lishuascha kivisi Hashem, that Yaakov had a nevuah, that Shimshon would say a heartfelt plea to Hashem, begging for strength to destroy the Pelishtim, as indeed he did at the very end of his life. And we'll see how the Pelishtim were afraid to bother the Jewish people because of Shimshon. And this obviously tells us about how great of a person he was. And as we go through this story, we'll see there was a lot of hope pinned on Shimshon. And we'll see many reasons why. And ultimately, he failed. And we'll have to see, where the failed potential of Mashiach existed over here. But this is not like any of the other Shoftim now. We're talking about clear-cut, tremendous sense of hope and ultimate sense of disappointment in his failure. And therefore, to have someone like a Mashiach, you need to have a lot of preparation to his birth. And again, we've seen in the past, every critical link in the messianic growth of the kingdom of David, there were all kinds of preparations involved in the parents, and all kinds of interesting stories with Yehuda and Tamar, Boaz and Ruth, Yishai and his wife. There were lots of stories behind the ancestors in order to bring such a great person. So this is no exception to the rule as we see over here. So let's begin over here. Vayehi pasuk beis. Vayehi ish echad mitzara mimishpachas Hadoni. There was one man who came from a city of Sarah, from the family of Don. Ushmo Manoach, and his name was Manoach. Now, why was he called Ish Echad? So the Medrash implies, from this word Ish Echad, one man, a singular man, that he was a great person. He was a great person. Ish Echad, a singular man. So that was meaning a very important person. However, as we will see throughout this story, the Gemara in Eruvin tells us that Manoach was an Am Haaretz, was an ignorant man. Okay? So that's not a contradiction, as we've already seen. It's possible for a person to genuinely be a good person, but genuinely being ignorant. A person wanting to do good things. You have people who have good natures and like to help people and don't want to hurt people, but are very ignorant and do things that are mistaken in terms of halacha. So this is going to be another example of this. He came from a place called, now it says, he came from Sarah. Now the truth of the matter is, Sarah was a city in the tribe of Yehuda, but he was from Dan. So we will see shortly that he married a wife from Yehuda, and that's going to be important, as we'll see in a minute. Ve'ishto akara velo yolada, and his wife was an akara, was barren, velo yolada, and did not have any children. Okay, now we are never told the wife's name throughout the story. However, the Gemara and Baba Basra and the Midrashim all tell us her name. A name I don't know how memorable it will be to you. Her name was Slal Ponis. Okay, never seen anyone name a girl yet Slal Ponis in the modern era. We will discuss where her name came from and what the significance of that name is, but that's her name, Salal, Sadi Lamed Lamed Ponis. And as we move on to the story, we'll see why she got that name, Salal Ponis, or other places call her Hatsalal Poni. Either way, there's different names that are mentioned for her. Now, Reb Tzadok mentions something that's important to mention at this point in time. He says that Yaakov thought he was the Mashiach, and he says, and her mother and his mother came from Shevet Yehuda, who was a descendant of Hur, where the kingdom of David indeed did come from. In other words, he was from a lineage from the mother's side that did produce eventually the Mashiach. Also from Betzalel. Interesting, Betzalel. What did Betzalel do? He built the Mishkan. He built the Mishkan, which was no small feat. And Betzalel ben Uri ben Hur, that is the Shevet of Yehuda. So you already see the mother's name was Slalponis, and here you have Betzalel. It's similar. Salel is the same wording over there. So, and interesting, who is the other person who built the Mishkan with Betzalel? Betzalel was from Shevet Yehuda. The other person who built the Mishkan was Aholiab, to the tribe of Dan. It's interesting, when the Mishkan was built, the primary builder was Yehuda, and the second assistant was from Dan. Okay, so says Reb Tzadok, he says, so the Mashiach, the father will come from Yehuda, and the mother will come from Dan. Now you find by Shimshon it was close, it was the opposite. The father came from Dan, and the mother came from Yehuda. But obviously, so you can already see there was reason to anticipate this could be a messianic person. However, it wasn't a perfect fit, because the father and mother came from the wrong tribes. I mean, it's the right tribes, but just reversed. So, what's going on over here? You see, when they built the Mishkan, we had a combination of Yehuda and Dan. You have now Shimshon, who's a combination of Yehuda and Dan, and there's great expectations from this. So Tzadok says the following. He says that if you look at the tribes, which would you say was the most high-profile tribe? Yehuda. Yehuda. Hashem says about Yehuda. Yehuda has God's name. Yehuda. Yud, Hey, Vav, Hey. With a Dalet in between. And the Dalet, 4, is a very important number itself. 4 represents the 4 corners of the world, and to unify Echad, we say Hashem, Shema Yisrael Hashem Echad, the last one is a Dalet. We should unify God in all 4 parts of the world. Yehuda has that name. Jews are called Yehudim. The word Jew is the English from the word Yehudi. That's where Jew comes from. Yehudi is Yehuda. And Yaakov blesses Yehuda that, the Mashiach should come from Yehuda. So that's the most prolific of the tribes. On the other hand, Dan is the lowest of the tribes. Dan comes from the maidservants, and Dan was the one who was the rear guard, as it were. So Dan is, so to speak, spiritually amongst the 12 is the lowest. So says Reb Tzadok that what we have is a combination of the highest and the lowest. When you have a combination of the highest and lowest, it's like you've gone full circle. It's like a full circle. So, and that's what Mashiach has to do. He has to incorporate, it's not a big deal for the guy who's the Mashiach to be representative of and believed in by the highest. He has to be believed by all. Now, where are you going to have, where is real unity? When the highest tribe and the lowest tribe are both together in this. Alright? So that it really makes a circle, as it were. You look, as you're going through the entire tribes, it makes a circle. The Gemara in Taina says that when the Mashiach will come, all the tzaddikim will make a circle, pointing to Hashem and saying, this is the God who I was waiting for. Okay? Everyone will be connected. Remember, a circle, everyone is equidistant from the center point. That's the whole reason why we dance. Jews dance in circles. Right? Jews dance in circles. There's a reason for that. Because when you're in a circle, everyone is equidistant from the center point. Nobody. You go dance at a wedding, you have a big rabbi and a regular guy, whatever, and they're all in the same circle. It means everybody's equidistant from the center point. And that's the difference between a circle and a straight line. A straight line has people here, and look, others way at the bottom, at the back. Judaism, we don't dance in straight lines. Right? The idea of a circle is telling us that everybody has an equal distance from the center, and therefore everybody has a purpose. And that's really what Mashiach is meant to bring about. So Shimshon was supposed to be the Mashiach, as Yaakov's blessing suggests. He has the lineage which will provide for that. As well, he is called a Nachash, a snake, right, in the prophecy. Now let's look at the gematria of the word Nachash. Is a Nun, which is numerically 50. Ches is numerically 8. Shin is numerically 300. It's 358. 358. So the word Mashiach, let's work the numbers of Mashiach. Mashiach Mem is 40. Shin is 300. Yud is 10. Ches is 8. 358. 358. So we see, and what's the whole point of the Mashiach? The Mashiach is meant to rectify what, ultimately? The original sin that was started by the snake. It was the snake that brought that Yetzer, brought death and mortality to the world. That was the Yetzer Hara incarnate that brought all kinds of trouble. Mashiach ultimately has to bring us back to the state of first man before the sin. So obviously the Mashiach will have to have the same gematria as the Nachash. Right? There's a lot of interesting 358s. If you look at the dreidel, the letters on the dreidel, Nun, Gimel, Nun, Gimel, Hey, Shin, is 358 as well. All right? So you see, that it's a significant number. Now, what was his father's name? Was Manoach. Now, how was he called? It says Ushemo Manoach. Every little subtlety is important. Ushemo Manoach. The Medrash says, sometimes you'll see people introduced as Ushemo Manoach, and his name was Manoach. Other times they'll tell us, and X was his name. Now, some will say his name was X. Someone said, and X was his name. So whenever it says Ushemo, his name, and then the name, that means it was a tzaddik. If it says and X was his name, that means he was a Rasha. So here it's saying Ushemo, and his name was Manoach. Meaning to say, a tzaddik takes his name and fulfills his potential, moving from Ushemo, and his name was Manoach, and he built up who his name is, what he was, as opposed to wicked people, and his name X, his name, was his name, but never really fulfilled the potential. So in fact, it's called Ushemo Manoach. Tells us he was a tzaddik. Again, the Medrash suggesting there's greatness to the father over here. All right. Now, his mother's name was Slalponis, or Hatsalponi. Slalponi.
Whose mother?
Shimshon.
I thought she was barren.
Hold on. Can't have miracles.
Oh, okay, sorry. No, we emphasize she was barren.
She was barren. Okay.
We're coming.
I mean, obviously, if we're dealing with Shimshon, we're talking about these two people. Okay. I'm sorry, maybe I assumed. I shouldn't have assumed. That's his parents. These are his parents.
Right,
his parents are Manoach and Slalponis. Mm-hmm. Right? But again, the fact that you see that they can't have any children, what is that reminding you of? Reminds you of the patriarchs and the matriarchs. They could not have children. Great people come out of barren people. Shmuel Hanavi, his mother Chana, didn't have children for a long time. So again, the miraculous nature of the birth of a person suggests that there's a lot of greatness coming into the world. The Gemara says, why did God make the Jewish matriarchs barren? Because Hashem lusts and yearns for the prayers of the righteous. Because when they pray, everyone gains from their prayers. So obviously we're dealing with a very special person who will miraculously come into existence, and that obviously there's a reason for that. Okay, we're already past the time. So we'll talk about Slalponis tomorrow. We'll continue dealing with the parents.